This happened about 11 years ago when I was 17. I'm from a small town in New Brunswick, Canada, which is pretty safe compared to some other cities in the province. But in reality, no place is ever truly safe, as creeps can be lying around in any corner. It was during the summer of 2013. I had spent the day with a few friends while there was a huge summer holiday party going on through part of the town which ran into the night. The day was going well for the most part, aside from friends ridiculously obsessing over multiple guys and letting that lead their day. We were teenage girls after all, so not too surprising. Anyway, the block party moved to a field as the night fell. I should add that this event is for all ages throughout the day, kind of like a family affair, but it was mostly underage and younger adults at this point of the night. However, this is irrelevant to the grander scheme of things. Some of my friends and I had separated, and it was just myself and one of my friends hanging out together. That was up until one of the many guys she was obsessing over decided to come hang out with us so that they could start out a makeout session. A little while later, a gaggle of police officers showed up to break up the party comprised of hundreds of us young folk, since it was around midnight and it was getting pretty rowdy. I didn't want to get busted by the cops for being underage, so along with everyone else, I decided I was going to make a run for it. Of course, I wasn't going to leave my friend behind, so I kept trying to get her attention by telling her the cops were there and that we had to go. But she was way too busy having her tongue glued inside that guy's mouth. I just said fuck it and told her I was leaving. I decided to walk home even though it was pretty late, but it was a nice night, so it wasn't like I've never walked around my town late at night before. The difference, however, was that it would take me 4.5 hours all the way home. Luckily for me, a couple girls in a cab mistook me for one of their friends and got the cab driver to pull over and give me a ride up to their destination, which actually saved me an hour. My joy was short-lived though, as I had noticed a red car making its way back around numerous times, and the panic started truly kicking in. All of the worst-case scenarios were now running through my mind, and I was just waiting for something terrible to happen, but I just kept walking. I just started going down a hill which was dimly lit, and as I turned to look back for the vehicle, I saw a man about 100 feet away from me following on his bicycle. The situation just kept getting worse and worse. I just pulled my hood over my head so that my appearance wouldn't be as visible, and then waited for the man on the bike to approach me. Finally, he caught up to me, and he had started asking typical creep questions that no one wants to hear when they're alone, and especially at night. Hey there, what's your name? How old are you? Do your parents know where you are? I told him my real age, but immediately gave a fake name and lied about my parents knowing where I was. Well, a white lie. I told him that my mom knew where I was and that she knew I was walking home. She knew I was out, but that I hadn't talked to her since earlier that day, so she didn't know I was walking home and there was no way to tell her. The cell phone I had didn't actually work other than for Wi-Fi, so I bluffed my way through the entire creepy encounter. This 50-something-year-old man then tells me that he noticed the red car had been going up and down the street all around me, and he figured I would be safer with him. What the actual fuck? Where was he even watching from, because I had only been out of the cab for maybe about 5 to 10 minutes before he appeared. Sadly, he likely wasn't wrong, because I can't imagine that being drugged into a random vehicle where no one could see me would be safer than being on a main road with an older man biking next to me. Nonetheless, either situation was undesirable. I didn't drink that day, so at least my wits were about me. But I didn't want to be walking practically glued to this man, so I started walking into the road a bit, which probably made him think I was drunk, but I don't care because I didn't want him around me. I just kept walking with him following and conversing with me, hoping every street that we passed he would decide to turn around, but that unfortunately never happened. So from around 12:30 to 2:30 in the morning, I was stuck with this creep because he just wouldn't leave me alone, and he kept making crude remarks about my appearance. Eventually, I came to a restaurant and inn, which was actually closed for the night, but the lights were still on, so I just stopped there and stayed by the street since it was well lit. I didn't do this because I wanted to be stuck in place with him, but because the next stretch of the road became very dark and there weren't much lights, I was certain and still am that if I'd gone that way, he would have drugged me off somewhere and probably done something terrible to me. At least from where I was, I could access the Wi-Fi from the restaurant. My mom wasn't online, so I had messaged one of the guys that my friends and I were hanging out with that day, and I asked him if he could call my mom for me because this creepy guy was following me and I wanted her to come pick me up. The asshole actually said no because he was upset that I cock-blocked him that day from hooking up with my friend because he was just trying to take advantage of her, and that she was way too obsessed with the guy to see it. She also happened to be the friend that was making out with some other guy by the end of the night, but again, that's irrelevant. Since he said no, I was trying to find someone else online that I knew would call my mom, and luckily one of my best friends were online. And so immediately she had called my mom for me after I told her what was going on. However, in the meantime, the man had started circling around me on his bike, saying things like, "You know, you have a smile like Julia Roberts and a body like Rihanna." He then proceeded to ask me to go behind the restaurant with him, to which I kept saying no. And at this point, I was actually really starting to get scared. Aside from that red vehicle from earlier, there hadn't been many vehicles passing by in an entire hour and a half to 2 hours I was being followed by this man. I just kept hoping a police car would drive by and notice what was going on since they were so vigilant earlier in the night, but none ever did. I was almost starting to cry, but was holding back my tears as hard as I could because I knew once he realized I was scared, it was going to be game over for me. He kept getting more and more inappropriate and was trying to touch me. And he had this look in his eyes that I knew all too well, as 2 months prior I had gotten the same exact look from a male relative that was about the same age as this guy. He did things to me. Things that I don't want to talk about, but you probably have an idea. And as ridiculous as it is to say, I was lucky and I got myself out of the situation before anything else he wanted to happen happened. So even though I knew what this stranger wanted, it solidified my fear even more to get that same look from him. He then proceeded to tell me the name of his granddaughter and that she had just graduated from high school a couple months earlier. Are you fucking serious? You have a granddaughter a year older than me and you're here trying to get me to hook up with you? What the hell's wrong with you? Everything about the interaction just kept getting worse and worse. That was until a vehicle pulled up next to me and offered me a ride, which I gladly took. It was the same cab driver from 2 hours earlier. He said while he was driving other customers around, he had noticed this guy following me earlier, and since the shift was over, he came looking for me. I was so fucking grateful. I stood outside of the restaurant for 30 minutes with the creep, and finally I was saved. I got in the cab and thanked him over and over, and then just sat in silence staring out the window while crying. When I got home, my mom was outside knocking on my aunt's door. We were neighbors, and my mom didn't have a vehicle of her own, so she was unsuccessfully trying to wake up my aunt so they could go get me. Thankfully, however, it wasn't needed. Before I got out of the cab, the driver gave me his card, and he told me if I ever needed a ride in a desperate situation to give him a call. He didn't even charge me for that ride. He just wanted to make sure I got home safe. And for that, I'm forever grateful. When I got out and told my mom what happened, she seemed to think the situation was funny. But I'm not sure if it was just a nervous laughter because of what happened with our relative a couple months earlier, or if it was just because she really thought it was funny. However, I didn't think it was funny whatsoever, and I just went up to my room to cry. The next day, my dad came to pick up my sister, and knowing that I wasn't planning on telling him what happened the night before, she of course had to blurt it out. He kept asking who it was and where it was because he wanted to go find the guy and beat his ass. But I didn't know his name or where he lived other than a potential area, and I didn't want my dad to get himself in trouble anyway. Even though it's been 11 years, I think about this night all the time, along with the situation with my relative as well as other fucked up things that happened in the following year. I've been living a paranoid life since then, and I'm scared even walking around by myself during the day, and I don't trust anyone. And as messed up as that situation and the one with my relative was, the things that have happened later in the year were worse. I'm fairly certain I have some form of PTSD because of everything that happened, but I haven't spoken to a therapist or a psychologist about anything that happened, so there's no way to really confirm. Hopefully one day I'll go talk to someone, but I don't really see it helping much. I know the situation probably could have been prevented by staying with my friend, but as I said earlier, I didn't want to get busted by the cops and I just really wanted to go home. Isn't it funny how I went from not wanting to get busted by the cops to hoping they would come to my rescue? And as for what happened in the year following this creepy encounter, those stories will be for another day. Thank you all for listening to my story, and stay safe. For reference, I'm an 18-year-old female, and I work in a department store in the business district of my city, which is notorious for having crackheads. Working there, I've encountered all kinds of people, and I have a lot of different stories to tell you. People smashing mirrors in our store, threatening to bash me up, and much more. I'd like to say that I'm used to it, but for some reason today in particular, it just really freaked me out. I was on break from work and it was around 7:30 p.m. Since it was a Friday night, the city was busier than normal, especially with the food markets that were on weekly. This meant that there were also a lot more dodgy people than usual. I was chilling on a bench outside my workplace on my phone when I heard a man talking in my ear. I jumped and swiveled around and I saw this scruffy, disheveled man leaning in uncomfortably close to me. He absolutely reeked of alcohol and he was mumbling stuff under his breath and he was asking if he could sing to me. Totally shocked, I said nothing, and he started loudly singing and talking about Jimmy Dean, still standing way too close to me. I made eye contact with this group of people, and I saw them take notice of me, but they just walked past. Not knowing what to do to get out of the situation, since I was scared he'd follow me back to work or become angry at me, I just stayed still, leaning away. Like I said, I like to think that in potentially dangerous situations, I know how to react from listening to so many scary stories. But in reality, I just froze. Thankfully, after what felt like ages of this man singing to me, but in reality what was a minute, a younger man around my age came up and then greeted the man, then pretended that we were friends and headed out to grab dinner together. The disheveled man leaned in to touch the man who was helping me, almost looking like he was trying to give him a hug. The man pushed him off and then took me away, and thankfully the creep didn't follow when we walked away. He then led me over to his group of friends who I had recognized the ones who I saw earlier. They stated that they had seen my eyes and knew that I was totally freaked out. I thanked them profusely, and then spent the rest of my break in the store stock rooms. So to that creep, I hope I don't see you around my work again. And to that guy and his friends who got me out of that situation, I have nothing but appreciation for you. Have a blessed life, and thank you so much. Just for a little background, this happened back in 2018 when I was 19 years old. I'm a female and I lived in Michigan at the time. I just got kicked out of college due to me failing one class. But anyway, I had moved back to my hometown and eventually got a job in my own apartment. I wasn't really making a lot of money, so sometimes at the end of the month I had to make meals last as long as possible. One night when I was waiting for my check to clear, I was sitting in my living room deciding whether I should get some food from the store or not. I was really hungry, but by the time I got the money it was already 12 a.m. and against my better judgment, I decided to go to the store anyway. Unfortunately, I didn't have a car and it was the beginning of winter, so I had to walk to the store to get at least a pack of noodles to hold me over for the night. The store was a 10-minute walk at best, so I got dressed and began to walk out. I'm thinking to myself, what could possibly happen? And if anything doesn't seem right, I could just book it all the way home. But then again, there's at least a few inches of snow on the ground at this point. But still, I was really hungry, so I just said screw it and headed out. 5 minutes into my walk, everything was going fine. But then just up ahead, I could see a guy in a long trench coat. The hairs on my neck stood up at the moment I saw him. But in my mind, I believed that maybe I could just be overreacting. I didn't completely ignore my intuition though, so I just crossed the street for good measure. I also decided to take the long way around to the store rather than just walk past him. That was my first mistake. I saw this man walk the opposite direction of me, so I thought I was safe. 2 minutes later, I turned around and I saw the same man with the trench coat, but this time his face was covered. Every alert in my mind then went off. How did he sneak up on me? Why didn't I hear him? The moment I turned around and made eye contact, he then instantly called out to me. "Hey, come here. Hey, I'm trying to talk to you. I just want to talk." At this moment, I'm freaking out in my head, but had gathered the courage to then yell back, "Hey man, leave me alone. I have a weapon." Which I did actually have. I had a knife, but I feared that he may have had a gun, and he started to run toward me. But he wasn't moving fast enough because of the snow. Thank God the snow was so thick that night. At that moment, I realized the only thing I could do was run no matter what because he was moving faster by the second. I looked around and the streets were clear with no sign of life. There were apartments all around, but everyone's lights were out and their blinds were closed. I then yelled out, "Go away," so loud so that someone can hear me, and then ran as fast as I could. While running in the snow, it was so difficult to run in my boots, so I literally kicked them off and the adrenaline kicked me in the ass all the way until I saw the bright light of a car, and I thought to myself just how fucking lucky I am. It was actually a cop, but the moment I turned around, he was no longer there. I'm very happy that nothing worse happened that night and that I learned my lesson on going out alone late at night. I'd rather starve. To this day, I still wonder if that could have been my last night alive and where he is now. When I was a sophomore in college in 19, I had started talking to this guy that was a coworker of my best friend. Let's call him Francis. I was never in love with the guy, but we were just trying to have fun. After a couple of weeks, I realized there was something that Francis wasn't telling me, but I wasn't too worried about it since we weren't serious anyway. After a while, he became dodgy. He wouldn't answer my texts for days, and when I'd see him around campus, he'd always have some sort of excuse like, "My phone is broken," or "I just haven't been around my phone lately," or something with his classes, all of which I knew were lies since he seemed glued to his phone normally. But I let it go because I didn't want to stress out over someone that I again wasn't that serious with. Anytime he would see me as well, he would ask for a ride somewhere or some money to go buy cigarettes. I was already extremely low on funds given I was a broke college student, and he also made unnecessarily rude remarks and showed no sense of boundaries. After another week of this, I decided that I wasn't going to really reach out to him anymore because he was just constantly on edge anytime I would see him around, and I just didn't like where things were going. Francis didn't like this. I mentioned earlier that it seemed Francis was hiding something from me during the time we were fooling around. My best friend at the time was working with him, and whenever I asked her about it, she said that she knew but promised him that she wouldn't say anything to me. I told her that if it's something important or would get me caught up in drama, I needed to know. She had decided to tell me that he had an ex-girlfriend that had been visiting him at his dorm, and that she caught him with the ex multiple times. I was a little shocked by this considering that he told me he hated her whenever he'd talk about his past relationship, but I realized that dodging my calls and texts for days was a red flag in itself. That was when I really just didn't want anything to do with him. Well, Francis heard that I didn't want to talk to him anymore, and he started blowing up my phone repeatedly asking me to talk. I woke up to 3 missed calls one morning, all at around 3 a.m., but something in my gut told me not to meet him. The next day, I caved in, and I asked my roommate at the time to be around when he came by to talk, since he made me a little uneasy. He told me that his ex came by his dorm the night before, and they got into a huge argument that resulted in her swallowing all of his bipolar medication and then hiding in the bathroom. He had to break into his own bathroom to get a hold of her, and he said that he shoved his fingers down her throat to make her vomit, but that she had pushed him off and took a PVC pipe and then slammed it against his head, which caused him to get a concussion. They both had to go to the ER for this, and that was around the time that he had called me at 3 a.m. the night before. I was mortified hearing this, because clearly both he and his ex had serious issues. After all this, he had asked me if our relationship was technically cheating if he had tried to break up with her in the past. I just said, "Dude, what the fuck? Tried to break up with her? This whole time, I wouldn't have even talked to you had I known there was an ex-girlfriend actually in the picture." He got upset at this and called me a bitch. At that point, I changed my tone to a kind and understanding one because I realized he was capable of a lot and that he wasn't in a good headspace. I was trying my best to make him leave, but without upsetting him more. Eventually he left and my roommate came downstairs stating that I was oddly nice with him. But I told her I was terrified of him and just wanted him gone in the calmest way I could. A couple of days later, I'm at my old best friend's dorm. He somehow still got an invite, and when I didn't hug him back, he had called me a cunt and then screamed at everyone else for defending me, and then left. After that, I had to start walking around with a taser, keychain alarm, and a knife at night. One of my guy friends thankfully told me if Francis ever tried to get near me to call him and then he'd be there in 5 minutes. I was extremely grateful for him. If I'd met Francis that night when he called me at 3 a.m., who knows what situation I could have been dragged into. Francis ended up dropping out of college that same semester. Fast forward a few years. I heard from my best friend that Francis ended up proposing to his psycho ex-girlfriend because she got pregnant. He calls me after I've met my current husband and left me a long voicemail about how I was the only girl who'd ever been kind to him and that he really misses me, and that he doesn't know if that kid is even his since his ex cheated on him and they're no longer together. I want to mention that I also found a picture of his son on Facebook, and he's a literal carbon copy of Francis. All I know is I dodged a bullet. Be wary of shady people who seem to be hiding something from you, because your gut is usually right. Francis, if you ever hear this story and realize it's you, please go get some help. Stay safe out there, college ladies. It may not seem like a big deal, but who you invite into your life is extremely important. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always stay